Olivia Bennett had been CEO for exactly 11 minutes when she destroyed the one man keeping her company alive. She saw him slumped over his desk asleep at the most critical station in the building, and she didn't ask a single question. Security, take his badge. HR, terminate him. Now. Andrew Foster lifted his head, tried to warn her, and she cut him off cold. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that this quiet single father had just spent 48 sleepless hours fighting off hackers to save her from total ruin. If you're watching right now, drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And please subscribe, because you are going to want to see how this ends. At 5:14 in the morning, Andrew Foster stood in a kitchen that smelled like burnt toast and cold coffee, and he did the math on his own body the way he did the math on everything else. 41 hours awake, maybe 42. He'd stopped counting sometime after the second midnight. "Daddy, your eyes are doing the thing again." He turned. Chloe was standing in the hallway in her dinosaur pajamas, one sock on the other, clutched in her fist, and she was looking at him with that steady, patient attention that always unsettled the adults who met her. 7 years old, going on 40. She'd been that way since her mother died. Some kids got louder after a loss. Chloe had gotten quieter and older and watchful. "What thing?" Andrew said. "The red thing. In the corners." She pointed at her own eye. "You look like the picture of the tired man." He crouched down to her level, which cost him more than it should have. His knees popped. His back complained. "The tired man's gonna be fine, sweetheart. The tired man just has a big project at work." "Is it the bad thing?" He went still. He hadn't told her anything. He was careful about that, careful about what he carried home and what he left at the door. But Chloe read him the way he read a system log. She didn't need the words. She caught the pattern underneath them. "There's a problem at work," he said carefully. "A real one. I'm the guy who has to fix it. And I'm gonna fix it. And then I'm gonna sleep for about 100 years. Deal." She considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "Deal, but you have to eat the eggs." "I have to eat the eggs." He agreed. He ate the eggs. He didn't taste them. His mind was already back inside the machine. To understand what happened to Andrew Foster, to understand how a man who saved a company got thrown out of it like garbage, you have to understand what Aurelius Pay actually was. From the street, it looked like any other glass tower with a clean logo. Corporate payments, wire transfers, transaction authentication for thousands of businesses across the country. Boring in the way that the most important things are always boring. But underneath that clean logo ran a river of money so wide and so fast that a 10-minute failure could cost tens of millions of dollars, and a real failure, a public one, could end the whole company inside a single afternoon. The infrastructure was the company. Everything else, the branding, the sales team, the conference rooms with the good chairs, was window dressing built around the machine. And the machine had one man who truly understood it. Andrew was 34 years old and carried the title of Senior Systems Engineer, which told you almost nothing. He knew the old API layers that dated back nearly a decade. He knew the failover logic that 3 separate CTOs had promised to modernize and never had. He knew the access control structures that had been patched by hand across a dozen leadership changes, and he knew the fragile little dependencies that existed only because somebody years ago had built a fix for a problem that no longer existed. And pulling that fix out now would break 3 things nobody could name. He was the institutional memory the company had never bothered to write down. To the org chart, he was one line among hundreds. To the system itself, he was the only person alive who knew where all the load-bearing walls were. New hires took one look at him and wrote him off. Rumpled shirt, cold coffee. The dark under the eyes that never fully cleared. He didn't network. He didn't schmooze. He didn't drop his accomplishments into meetings so other people could admire them. He just showed up, did the work, and went home to his daughter. "You gotta learn to sell yourself, man," a younger engineer named Daniel had told him once over vending machine sandwiches. Nobody up there knows what you do down here. Andrew had smiled a little. The system knows what I do. The system don't sign your paycheck. No, Andrew said. But it don't lie about me either. He'd meant it as a small joke. He didn't know yet how expensive that philosophy was about to become. The trouble started 2 days before it all fell apart, and it started so quietly that any other engineer in the building would have missed it entirely. Andrew almost missed it too. He was running a routine sweep of the transaction authentication logs, the kind of thing he did without thinking the way you check the mirrors when you drive, when something snagged at the back of his mind. A cluster of requests in the international processing queue. Low frequency. Nothing dramatic. Timed to mimic the rhythm of legitimate internal traffic with enough precision that the automated filters had waved them through without a second look. He stared at the pattern for a long moment. Then he sat up straight in his chair for the first time in an hour. "That's not right," he said to no one. The requests weren't trying to overwhelm the system. They weren't trying to trigger errors. They weren't loud. They were quiet, patient, and methodical. They were learning the system, feeling it out, mapping it. He traced the activity backward node by node, and his stomach dropped a little more with every step. Somebody had gotten in, not through the front door. Through a forgotten side window, a low-priority authentication relay at the very edge of the architecture, a piece of the system that handled a narrow slice of cross-border payment verifications, and that almost nobody thought about anymore. From that little foothold, whoever it was had been quietly probing deeper, testing what the relay could reach, establishing a path toward the center, toward the core payment cluster where the real money lived. And they weren't in a hurry. That was the part that scared him most. They weren't smashing and grabbing. They were setting up, waiting for a high-volume window when the redirected funds would blend into the flood and the reconciliation systems could be quietly blinded before anyone noticed a dollar was gone. Andrew took a slow breath. Then he picked up the phone and called his manager. "Andrew, it's 5:30. His manager's voice was thick with sleep. "This better be the building on fire." "It's worse than the building on fire," Andrew said. "We've got an active intrusion in the international relay. Somebody's inside and they're moving toward the core cluster. This is a real breach, not a glitch. Somebody's hands are on our system right now." There was a long silence on the line. "Okay," his manager finally said, and something in his tone had already shifted not toward alarm, but away from it. "Okay, walk me through it. But Andrew, I need you to be 100% sure before we do anything with this." "I'm sure." "You think you're sure. There's a difference. You know what tomorrow is." Andrew closed his eyes. He knew exactly what tomorrow was. Tomorrow, the founder's granddaughter took over as chief executive, Olivia Bennett. 29 years old, sharp as a blade, and from everything Andrew had heard, desperate to prove she wasn't just a name on a family tree. Tomorrow was the day the whole company was supposed to look clean, calm, and under control. "You want to walk into her first morning," his manager said slowly, "and tell the new CEO that the payment system's been compromised on the last shift of the old regime. You want to hand her that? Before she's even sat down." "I don't want to hand anybody anything," Andrew said. "I want to stop it. That's a different thing. Here's what I want you to do." His manager's voice took on the careful, reasonable tone of a man protecting himself. "I want you to keep monitoring it. Watch it. Don't touch anything. Don't file anything official. Don't ring any bells. If it's real, we'll have proof and we'll handle it clean. If it resolves on its own, and half these things do, then we didn't just detonate a crisis on the worst possible day for no reason. Are we clear?" Andrew was quiet for a moment. He understood exactly what he'd just been asked to do. He'd been asked to sit on his hands and hope. "Yeah," Andrew said. "We're clear." He hung up. And then he did the exact opposite of what he'd been told. Because here is the thing you learn about Andrew Foster. The man could not stand by and watch a thing break when he knew how to keep it whole. It wasn't about the company. It wasn't even about the job. It was something older than that. Something his father had put in him a long time ago, in a house where they didn't have much, But they didn't leave a job half-finished either. You see a thing that's wrong, his father used to say, and you know how to make it right? Then that's not a choice anymore, son. That's just who you are. So Andrew went to work. He couldn't take the system offline. The money never stopped moving, not for 1 second, so he had to defend it while it ran. He started building temporary isolation barriers around the compromised segments, quiet little walls that would absorb suspicious traffic without triggering a single visible failure. He constructed manual redirect layers by hand. He hot-patched individual nodes one at a time, working through the ancient architecture the way a man shores up a sinking house, not with proper blueprints and proper materials, but with whatever's within reach, done carefully enough to hold. The whole thing was a nightmare of accumulated history, a decade of partial upgrades and emergency fixes stacked on top of each other. There was no clean way in, and no safe way to shut it down and scrub it. Every move he made on a live system carrying real money with zero margin for a real mistake. He worked through the first morning. He worked through the afternoon. When the day shift came and went, nobody thought twice about Andrew Foster still hunched at his console. He was always there. He was part of the furniture. Daniel stopped by around dinner time with a sandwich. "You look rough, man. You've been here all day." "Little project," Andrew said, not looking up. "Anything I can help with?" For a second, Andrew almost told him. He almost said, "Sit down. I need another pair of eyes because I'm holding a wall up with one hand, and I can't keep it up forever." But he looked at Daniel, good kid smart but green, and he knew this wasn't a thing you could teach fast enough. Not tonight. "I got it," Andrew said. "Go home. Kiss your girl for me." "You sure?" "I'm sure." He wasn't sure, but there wasn't anybody else, so what was the point in saying so? The first night bled into the second day, and the second day bled toward the second night, and Andrew Foster kept the whole thing alive with his bare hands. He drank whatever coffee was in the pot. He ate from the vending machines. Around midnight of the second night, he changed his shirt in the staff bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at himself in the mirror for a long minute. "You can do this," he told the man in the glass. "You already did the hard part. You just gotta hold it." He called home once late, keeping his voice light. "You in bed, baby girl." "Mrs. Harmon made me go at 8. Chloe reported, sounding mildly betrayed. "But I stayed awake to talk to you." "You shouldn't have." "I wanted to." A pause. "Did you fix the bad thing yet?" "Almost. Getting there." "You promised you'd rest after." "I did promise that." "Then hurry up," she said, with the pure, uncomplicated logic of a 7-year-old, "so you can keep your promise." He laughed, and it came out rough. "Yes, ma'am. Go to sleep. I love you to the moon." To the moon, and stuck there. She answered their thing, the words worn smooth from use, and then she was gone. He held the dead phone against his ear for a second longer than he needed to. Then he put it down and went back into the machine. Late in the second night, he found the thing that turned his blood to ice water. He'd been tracing the attacker's path deeper, mapping every place they'd touched, and he found it buried inside one of the processing clusters, a piece of code that didn't belong. Dormant. Silent. Perfectly invisible during normal operation. He read it 3 times before he let himself believe it. It was a trigger. A staged trap. And it was armed to fire on the single most ordinary event imaginable, a system restart. Andrew put both hands flat on the desk and made himself breathe. He understood in an instant the full and terrible elegance of it. A restart was nothing. Routine maintenance. Engineers did it constantly to clear memory buildup, to resync services, to smooth out congestion. It was the first thing any tired supervisor reached for when a cluster got sluggish. It was muscle memory. And the moment anyone performed that restart, the moment the memory cleared, every temporary wall Andrew had built by hand would vanish. All of it lived in volatile memory. A restart would wipe it clean. The isolation barriers would collapse. The dormant trigger would wake up. The path to the core payment cluster would swing wide open, and the attack, which had been patiently waiting for weeks, would finally go live. The attackers hadn't just broken in. They'd left a landmine sitting under the one-floor tile everybody stepped on without thinking. Andrew sat back in his chair. "They want us to do it to ourselves," he said softly. "They want us to pull our own trigger." He knew right then that the technical fight was only half the battle. The other half was human. He had to make sure that nobody restarted that system before he could get in front of leadership and make them understand. So he started writing. He built a file, time-stamped log summaries, patch annotations in his own shorthand, clear plain warnings written for people who didn't speak the language. He was going to walk into that building in the morning, and he was going to get in front of the new CEO if he had to bypass every channel in the company to do it, and he was going to make somebody understand. At the very bottom of the last page in a font, a little bigger than the rest, he typed the most important sentence he had ever written in his life. "If I am no longer available, do not restart the core services under any circumstances. This is not a performance issue. This is a staged attack waiting to be triggered. Call me first." And then he typed his phone number. He saved the file. He leaned back. He told himself he'd rest his eyes for just 1 minute, just 60 seconds, while he waited for the morning shift to arrive and take the handoff. The body has limits that don't care about intentions. Somewhere past 48 hours without real sleep, sitting in front of a wall of scrolling green log output, Andrew Foster put his head down on his forearms, and he did not come back up. Olivia Bennett walked into the operations center at 7:45 that morning, and she was already angry before she saw him. Not at anything specific. Angry at the shape of things, at the softness she believed she'd inherited, at the assumption which she'd read in a dozen faces that first week that she was a placeholder, a granddaughter keeping a chair warm. She'd spent her whole career walking into rooms where people expected her to fail, and she had learned exactly one way to fight that: come in hard, come in sharp, and let nobody mistake you for soft. She'd decided to tour the infrastructure herself, without a briefing, without a department head's carefully staged presentation. She wanted the company raw. She wanted to see what it really looked like when nobody was performing for her. She got her wish. She walked the length of the cold, bright floor past rows of monitors and tired engineers finishing the overnight shift, and she stopped when she reached the center console. A man was asleep at his desk, not resting his eyes, not pausing. Fully, completely asleep, head down on his forearms at the single most sensitive station in the entire building, while amber warnings crawled across 24 screens around him. Olivia felt something hot and clean move through her chest. This was it. This was everything she had come to end. A man sleeping at the controls of a payment system that moved millions of dollars a minute. Careless, unaccountable, comfortable. The living portrait of a culture that had gone soft under an old man's watch, and she was going to be the one who put an end to it, and she was going to do it now in front of everyone, so that the message could not be missed. She did not look at the monitors. She did not read the alerts. She did not consider, not for 1 second, that a man asleep at the most important desk in the building might be asleep there for a reason. She looked at the badge holder on the desk. She read the name off of it. Andrew Foster. He didn't move. She said it louder, and this time there was steel in it. Andrew Foster. He came up hard. For a few seconds, he was nowhere. His head was heavy as a stone. His eyes were dry and screaming, and there was a low ringing in his ears as his body dragged itself up out of a place much deeper than ordinary sleep. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who was talking. The world was a smear of light and sound. Then it snapped into focus, and he saw her. Young, sharp suit. The face from the company-wide announcement he'd seen the week before. The new CEO. And under her folded arms and the set of her mouth, he read the entire situation in a single instant. She thought he'd been sleeping on the job. Every other man might have sat there stunned. Andrew's mind was already moving because his mind had been living inside this crisis for 2 days, and it did not have the luxury of confusion. He needed to get the words out. He needed her to understand before anything else could happen. "You need to hear what I have to say about the core payment cluster," he said. The words came out cracked and urgent. "Right now, before anything else, I need you to... Please don't." She cut across him like a blade. "I don't need to hear anything on my first morning." Her voice carried across the entire floor, now pitched to reach every desk. "Security, collect his access card. HR, initiate termination immediately." Every engineer in earshot stopped moving. Andrew steadied himself against the desk. His heart was slamming. But his voice, when it came, was low, and even the voice of a man watching a truck run a red light in slow motion, still trying right up to the end to shout a warning. "Ma'am." He kept his eyes locked on hers. "Listen to me. There is an active intrusion in this system. I have been holding it together by hand for 2 days. If someone restarts the core services..." "I've said everything I'm going to say." She had already turned away from him. She was watching the security officer cross the floor. "If someone restarts it," Andrew said louder now, urgent, "the whole thing comes down. There's a trigger buried in the cluster. A restart arms it. You have to... Mr. Foster." She didn't even look back at him. "You're finished. Please don't make it undignified." And that was the moment Andrew understood he had lost. Not the argument. He had never had a chance at the argument. He'd lost the only thing that mattered, the chance to make her hear him. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she'd already filed him away as a symbol, a problem solved, a box checked on her first morning of leadership. He wasn't a person to her. He was a prop in the story she'd already decided to tell. He looked around the floor. There were men in that room who knew. Engineers who'd seen him there for 2 days straight, who'd watched him not leave, who had to have known on some level that something more than laziness was happening at that desk. He caught the eye of one, then another. He saw them look away. Not one of them said a word. He didn't blame them. Not really. To speak up against the new chief executive in her first hour would have taken a kind of professional courage that almost nobody has when the moment actually arrives. He understood that. He'd spent his whole life understanding people better than they understood themselves. But it still cut. The security officer reached his desk. Andrew looked at him, a guy named Reyes, a guy he'd said good morning to 1,000 times. "Andrew," Reyes said quietly. "Man, I'm sorry. I gotta..." "I know." Andrew's voice was gentle. "It's not on you. Do your job." He reached up and removed his own badge. Slowly, without a single word of argument. He set it on the desk beside the keyboard next to the cold coffee and the open laptop still cycling its monitoring displays. He did not raise his voice. He did not list for the room the 48 hours he'd just given them. He did not tell them about the walls he'd built with his bare hands, or the trigger buried in their machine, or the daughter waiting at home who'd made him promise to rest. He did not beg. He did not defend himself. He asked for nothing. He stood up. His legs barely held him. And then he did the only thing he had left to do, the last act of a man who had spent 2 days trying to protect people who were about to throw him out the door. He looked past Olivia. He found Daniel standing frozen at the edge of the room, pale, horrified, saying nothing. Andrew held his gaze, and he said 4 words clearly, slowly, loud enough for half the floor to hear. "Do not restart it." Daniel's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Daniel?" Andrew's voice was steady as stone. "Whatever happens today, whatever it looks like, you do not let anybody restart the core cluster. You hear me? Do not restart it." And then he turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, someone let out a breath. Someone whispered something to the person beside them. One engineer thought the old man was just being dramatic on his way out, a wounded ego's parting shot. Another figured it was the bitter theater of a guy who felt wronged and wanted the last word. Olivia Bennett didn't register it as anything at all. She had already turned back to the security officer, already moved on, already filed the whole thing under necessary act of leadership. The first clean signal that the era of comfortable negligence was over. In her mind, She had just proven something. She had walked in, and within 11 minutes taken decisive action against exactly the kind of rot she'd been brought in to cut out. She felt, if anything, a small, sharp satisfaction. She had no idea, none, that she had just with her own mouth given the order that would nearly end her grandfather's company by lunchtime. Andrew walked out of that building at the pace of a man with nothing left in his legs. The morning light hit him, and he flinched from it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, already messages from people who no longer had any standing to send them, from managers scrambling from a company that had just thrown him away and would within hours be screaming for him to come back. He didn't look at them. He walked to his car, and he sat down behind the wheel, and he did not start the engine right away. He thought about the file with the warning at the bottom, the warning in the bigger font, the phone number no one had called. It was still there, sitting in the repository where he'd left it. Maybe someone would read it. Maybe Daniel's 4 words would be enough. Maybe the walls would hold on their own for a few hours, long enough for someone smart to open that file and understand. Maybe. But he knew the machine. He knew the muscle memory of a tired supervisor watching a cluster go sluggish. He knew how ordinary a restart was, how small, how automatic. And he knew that "do not restart it," spoken by a man who'd just been fired and marched out the door in front of the whole floor, carried about the same weight as a stranger's opinion on the weather. He put his head against the steering wheel for a moment. Then he thought about Chloe, waiting at home, making him promise to rest. "Okay, baby girl," he murmured. "Daddy's coming home." He started the car. He had not been given a single opportunity to share what he knew. He had detected the attack 2 days before anyone else. He had reported it and been told to be quiet. He had fought it alone for 48 hours without sleep. He had built the walls, found the trigger, written the warning, left the number. And then, 45 minutes before the second trading window of the day would open, 45 minutes before a tired supervisor would glance at a sluggish cluster and reach for the one command that would tear everything open, Andrew Foster drove home to his daughter, not knowing whether anything he had done, anything he had built, anything he had begged them to hear would be enough to save the people who had just decided he was worth nothing at all. Back in the operations center, the dashboards looked calm. The isolation layers he'd built overnight were still standing still, quietly absorbing the poison, still holding the most sensitive processes stable, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly what they were looking at. To Olivia, moving briskly through her morning briefings, the system running smoothly in Andrew's absence confirmed everything. If nothing had broken the moment he left, then clearly there'd been nothing urgent to begin with. Clearly the man had been exactly what he'd looked like, a symbol of a soft, sleeping, unaccountable past. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. And in the technical department, where a handful of engineers who'd known Andrew for years sat quietly furious and completely powerless. Daniel stared at the primary console with 4 words echoing in his head and prayed that no one would need to touch it. The clock on the wall read 12:03. The core cluster was about to get sluggish. The cluster went sluggish at 12:31. It started small, the way these things always start. A processing queue that normally cleared transactions in fractions of a second began taking 2 seconds. Then 3. Transactions stacked up behind each other like cars at a light that wouldn't change. On the duty supervisor's screen, a familiar yellow congestion indicator crept up from the bottom of the display. His name was Marcus Webb, and he'd been running that floor for 11 years, and he had seen this exact pattern 1,000 times. "We got back up on Cluster 4, he said, not even looking up. "Memory's gummed. Standard thing." The engineer beside him nodded without much interest. It was lunchtime. Half the floor was thinking about food. Marcus cracked his knuckles and pulled up the maintenance console. This was the easiest fix in the world. A service restart. Clear the memory. Resync the services, watch the congestion melt away like it always did. He'd done it more times than he could count. It was the first tool any supervisor reached for, the way you jiggle a key that sticks in a lock. His fingers moved toward the command, and across the room, Daniel felt something go cold in his chest. "Wait," Daniel said. Marcus glanced over. "What? Don't restart it." Marcus blinked at him. Say again. Daniel crossed the floor, and his heart was pounding in a way he couldn't quite explain to himself. He kept hearing it, that low, steady voice, those 4 words, the way Andrew had locked eyes with him, and made him promise without ever using the word promise. Do not restart it. Whatever it looks like. Whatever it. He said not to restart it, Daniel said. Andrew, this morning, right before they walked him out, he looked right at me, and he said, "Don't let anybody restart the core cluster." Marcus set his hands flat on the desk and gave Daniel a long, tired look. Andrew, he repeated. Yeah. The Andrew that got fired 4 hours ago for sleeping at his post. I know how it sounds. Do you? Marcus wasn't cruel about it. That was the thing Daniel would remember later. Marcus wasn't being a jerk. He was being reasonable. He was being exactly as reasonable as any experienced man would be. Daniel, the guy got walked out this morning in front of the whole floor. However you feel about it, the man's gone. And on his way out the door, he said something dramatic. That's what people do when they get fired, son. They say something that sounds important, so the rest of us stand around feeling bad. He didn't sound dramatic. He sounded... Daniel struggled for it. He sounded scared, Marcus. Not for himself. He looked scared for us. Marcus softened a degree. Look, I hear you. And if Andrew filed something official, if there's a ticket, if there's a work order, if there's anything in the system that tells me not to touch this cluster, I will not touch it. I promise you that. But I got clients backing up right now, real transactions failing to clear right now, and a floor full of alerts telling me to do the one thing that fixes it. I can't run this operation off a fired man's parting words. You understand, I can't. Daniel opened his mouth. And here is where it all turned. Because Daniel was young, and Daniel was junior, and Daniel did not have the standing or the certainty to say, "Stop everything. I don't care what it costs. Do not touch that machine." He had a feeling. He had 4 words from a man management had just declared a problem. He had nothing he could point to. There's a file, Daniel said suddenly. In the repository, Andrew's notes. I saw the folder this morning. Maybe there's something in there. Maybe he wrote down what he meant. Then go find it, Marcus said not unkindly. Go read it, and if it says what you think it says, you come back and you show me and we'll figure it out together. Just don't restart it until I get back. Please. 2 minutes. Marcus hesitated. And that hesitation, that one small human decency might have saved everything, except that at that exact moment a second cluster began throwing congestion warnings, and then a third, and the yellow indicators on Marcus Webb's screen started marching toward red, and a message popped up from the floor manager upstairs. What's going on with processing latency? Getting calls and 11 years of instinct took the wheel. Go, Marcus told Daniel. Fast. Daniel ran, and Marcus Webb, watching 3 clusters choke at once with the manager breathing down his neck and clients calling in, made the only decision that 11 years of experience would allow him to make. He looked at the screen. He looked at the command. He thought about a fired man's dramatic goodbye, and he thought about the very real, very present congestion strangling his floor, and he weighed them against each other, and it wasn't even close. He's been terminated, Marcus said quietly to himself, the way a man says a thing to make it settle. He executed the restart at 12:47. For about 90 seconds, it looked like he'd been right. The queues cleared. The congestion smoothed. The yellow indicators dropped back toward green one after another, exactly the way they always did. Marcus felt his shoulders come down from around his ears. He almost laughed at himself for hesitating. See, he murmured. Memory buildup. Every time. Then the authentication tokens went asynchronous, and the floor of the world dropped out. It came in waves. The first sign was a scatter of transaction sessions reporting impossible states payments, showing as uninitialized as if they'd never happened, as if the money that had unquestionably been moving 1 second ago had simply forgotten it existed. Then the token synchronization service lost its grip on the primary routing pathway, and the loss cascaded because the moment the restart wiped the memory, it wiped every wall Andrew had built. All of it, had lived in that volatile space. All of it vanished in an instant. The isolation barriers collapsed. The dormant trigger woke up. And on Marcus Webb's screen, the indicators that had just gone green began turning red, not one at a time now, but in sweeping bands the way a field goes dark when the clouds come over fast. "No," Marcus said. "No, no, no. What is—" His hands were flying across the keyboard. "Somebody get over here. Somebody get over here right now." Outbound transaction routing began redirecting a subset of traffic toward endpoints that were not part of Aurelius Pay's verified network toward addresses out in the dark, exactly where the attackers had been patiently building a road to for weeks. Reconciliation for a whole category of corporate transfers stopped happening silently, the numbers simply ceasing to add up with nothing flagging that they'd stopped. Several high-value payment instructions froze in a suspended state that was neither complete nor cleanly reversible. Money caught halfway between here and gone. And the monitoring systems blind now, without Andrew's bridging logic, couldn't even tell the engineers what they were looking at. Internal error or active theft? The dashboards didn't know. They just bled red and offered no answers. Within 4 minutes, 6 engineers were crowded around the primary console, and none of them understood what they were seeing. "Roll it back," someone said. "Roll back to the last stable state." To when there's no stable checkpoint, the last clean state was before this morning. Then roll back to this morning. It won't anchor. Look, it's targeting a system state that was never documented. The rollback's got nothing to grab onto. That was the moment the horror started to take its true shape, because that was the moment they began to understand that the thing keeping them alive an hour ago had not been anything written down. There was no blueprint of the defenses that had just collapsed. There was no map of the walls that had just fallen. It had been a living construction built by hand in the dark under fire by one man who was now sitting in his car in his own driveway with his phone unanswered. "Isolate the affected nodes," another voice said sharp with rising panic. "Cut them off from the core." "Which nodes? They're all talking to each other. The dependencies are I don't even know which of these connections are supposed to be here and which ones the attackers built. Andrew would know." Silence. A short, awful silence. Andrew's gone. Daniel came back at a dead-run laptop open in his hands, and he saw the wall of red before he'd even reached them, and his stomach dropped straight through the floor. "You restarted it," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice cracked in the middle of it. "Marcus, you restarted it." Marcus didn't turn around. His hands were shaking over the keyboard. The floor was choking. "I had 3 clusters going down. I had the manager on my—" He stopped. He couldn't finish it. Because whatever the reasons had been, they had evaporated, and what was left on the screen was a catastrophe with his fingerprints on the launch button. "I found the file," Daniel said, and his voice was terrible and quiet. "I found Andrew's file." He set the laptop down on the desk beside Marcus with a hand that was not steady, and he scrolled to the bottom of the last page, and he read it out loud to the 6 men crowded around the console in a room that had gone very still under the screaming of the alerts. "If I am no longer available," Daniel read, "do not restart the core services under any circumstances. This is not a performance issue. This is a staged attack waiting to be triggered. Call me first." Nobody spoke. "He left a phone number," Daniel said. "Right here, at the bottom. He left his number." Marcus Webb stared at the words on the screen, and something in his face came apart quietly, the way a man's face comes apart when he realizes the size of a thing he cannot take back. "He knew," Marcus whispered. "He knew this exact thing was going to happen. He wrote it down. He put his hand over his mouth. Oh God. He told us. He stood right there, and he told us, and I—" "Call the number," someone said. "Call it. Call it right now." Daniel already had his phone out. Upstairs, Olivia Bennett was in the middle of her 4th meeting of the morning, laying out expectations for the marketing department in the precise, unambiguous language she'd been using all day, when her assistant opened the conference room door without knocking. That was the first thing that told her something was wrong. Nobody had knocked without knocking all week. People were terrified of her. And here was her assistant, white as paper, standing in the doorway. "Ms. Bennett, you need to come down to operations, now." "I'm in a meeting." "Ms. Bennett." The young woman's voice shook. Something's happening with the payment system. They said to get you. They said it's bad." Olivia felt the first thin thread of unease, but she folded it down and stood up smoothly, because she was not a person who let a room see her rattled. "Excuse me," she said to the marketing team. "We'll reconvene." She walked to the elevator with her assistant half jogging to keep up, and she told herself it was a glitch, a hiccup, the kind of thing that happened in every company on every ordinary day. She told herself the timing was just bad luck. She rode down 2 floors, composing the calm, decisive face she would wear when she walked in. The doors opened and the face didn't survive the first 3 seconds. The operations center she'd walked through that morning, cool, orderly, quiet, was gone. In its place was a room full of people moving with the tight, desperate speed of people who know exactly how bad something is and are afraid to say it out loud. The monitors weren't showing amber warnings anymore. They were red. Overwhelmingly, wall-to-wall red. Somewhere a phone was ringing, and nobody was answering it. Somewhere else, 3 phones were ringing. Olivia stopped just inside the doors. "What is happening?" she said. Nobody heard her, or nobody could spare the half-second to answer. She raised her voice. "I said, what is happening?" A senior engineer turned from the primary console. His face was pale and strangely composed, the composure of a man who has passed all the way through panic and out the other side into the flat calm of telling the truth, because there's nothing left to lose. "We've got an active breach," he said. "Outbound routings redirecting to endpoints outside our network. Reconciliations failing silent on corporate transfers. We've got high-value transactions frozen in a state we can't complete and can't reverse. And we can't stop it because—" He stopped, chose his words. "Because we just tore down the defenses that were holding it back." What defenses? Who tore down? He was holding the whole system together by hand, the engineer said. For 2 days. And we just took a restart and deactivated every layer he built. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Olivia felt the floor tilt very slightly under her, and she planted her feet against it, and she said in a voice that had lost all of its morning certainty, "Who?" But she already knew. She knew before the engineer's eyes moved, before Daniel looked up from his phone with a face full of something close to hatred, before the whole room seemed to turn very slightly toward her, toward the woman who had walked in 11 minutes into her tenure and thrown out the only man who understood the machine that was now dying in front of them all. "The engineer you terminated this morning," the senior man said quietly. "Andrew Foster." The name landed in the middle of the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the silence rippled out from it. Olivia did not move for a long moment. Then, because she was who she was, because whatever else was true, she was not a coward, and she did not run from a fire. Once she understood it was burning, she stepped forward into the room. "Talk to me," she said. "What are we doing? What's the plan?" "We've tried rollbacks. They won't anchor. We've tried isolating the compromised nodes, but we can't map the dependencies. Nobody here knows the legacy architecture deep enough to—" "Where is the CTO?" "On his way. But ma'am," the engineer hesitated. "The CTO's strong on strategy. He is not going to know this system at the node level. Nobody does. Nobody except the man I fired this morning," Olivia said, flatly, finishing it for him. The engineer said nothing, which was answer enough. Daniel stood up. And Daniel, who was junior and who should have kept his mouth shut around the CEO, did not keep his mouth shut because there was a catastrophe on the screens and he was past caring about his career. "He told us," Daniel said. His voice was shaking. "He told you this morning. He tried to tell you and you cut him off. He told me on his way out, do not restart it. Do not let anybody restart it. He wrote it in a file. He left a warning and a phone number. He knew exactly what would happen, and it happened all of it exactly the way he said. "Daniel," the senior engineer said low, "not now." When? Daniel's eyes were wet and furious. "When's the time to say it? After we've lost everything?" He turned back to Olivia, and his voice broke. "He begged you to listen. And you? Enough." But Olivia didn't say it to shut him up. She said it because every word he was saying was true, and she could feel each one hitting somewhere deep, and she could not afford the company. Could not afford for her to stand there and take the beating she deserved while the money bled out of the machine. "You're right," she said. And that stopped Daniel cold because it was the last thing he'd expected to hear. "You're completely right. I'll answer for all of it, later. Right now there is exactly one question that matters, and it is not whose fault this is. The question is, can we stop it? Can anyone stop it?" The room was quiet. "Can we?" she pressed. "Anyone. Tell me the truth. Can the people in this building stop this?" One by one they looked away from her. The senior engineer answered for all of them, and he answered honestly, which was its own kind of mercy and its own kind of horror. "We're doing everything we know how to do. And everything we know how to do isn't going to be enough. Not fast enough. This system evolved into something that isn't in any documentation. The only person who ever really understood how it actually works, not how it was designed, how it actually works, walked out that door this morning." Olivia turned and looked at an empty workstation. Andrew's workstation. His cold coffee was still sitting there. His badge was still on the desk where he'd set it down without a word of argument. And beside the keyboard, a browser was still open to a repository folder, and there was a file in it. "Show me his notes," she said. They pulled the file up on the big display, and Olivia Bennett read every word of it, standing there in the middle of the collapse, with the phones ringing, and the screens burning red around her. She read the time-stamped logs. She read the patch annotations in a shorthand she couldn't fully follow, but could feel the meaning underneath the meaning. "I found this 2 days ago. I have been fighting it alone this whole time. I built these walls with my hands because no one would help me." She read the plain language warnings written for people who didn't speak the language, and she understood with a slow and terrible clarity that Andrew Foster had written those warnings for exactly this moment. For people exactly this lost. He had known he might not be in the room. He had written it for the room he wouldn't be in. And then she reached the bottom of the last page, and she read the line in the slightly larger font. The line he had clearly typed last. "If I am no longer available, do not restart the core services under any circumstances. This is not a performance issue. This is a staged attack waiting to be triggered. Call me first." And below it the phone number. Olivia stood very still. She thought about the morning. She thought about his face when he tried to speak. She made herself look at it in her memory honestly for the first time. She had told herself in the moment that she'd read careless indifference in that face. But that was a lie she'd told herself afterward. She hadn't read anything in his face. She hadn't looked. She'd looked at a sleeping man at a critical desk, and she'd filled in the rest with the story she'd already written before she ever walked onto that floor. The story where she was the hard, clear-eyed reformer cutting out the rot. She'd needed him to be the rot. So she'd made him the rot. And she'd refused to hear a single complete sentence out of his mouth because hearing him might have ruined the story. He had tried to tell her. "You need to hear what I have to say about the core payment cluster." Those had been his exact words. The core payment cluster. The exact thing that was dying in front of her right now. He had named it. He had named the precise thing, and she had said, "Please don't," and she had turned away. Something moved in her chest that she did not have a professional name for. It was not something she could process quickly and set aside. It sat there heavy and immovable, and she understood that it was going to be there for a long time. "Has anyone called this number?" she said, quietly. Daniel held up his phone. 3 times. It just rings. I think he's not answering." Why wouldn't he answer? We're calling from the company. Why wouldn't? And then she understood that too, and it made the thing in her chest twist harder. Because he was awake for 2 days. she said slowly. And then we sent him home, and his body finally shut down. He's not ignoring us. She looked at the phone in Daniel's hand. He physically cannot hear it ringing. Nobody said anything. Olivia looked around the room one more time, at the red screens, at the frozen transactions, at the engineers doing their very best work, which she now understood was not going to be enough, and which they understood too, which was written all over every face in the room. She looked at the empty chair with the cold coffee on the desk, and then she made the second major decision of her first day as chief executive of Aurelius Pay. And this one, unlike the first she made after she had looked at everything. HR, she said. I need Andrew Foster's home address. The room went still. Ma'am, the senior engineer said. His address. Now. You want to send someone? No. She was already pulling her keys out of her pocket. I'm going myself. Ms. Bennett, the situation here, Olivia said, is that the only person on earth who can fix this is asleep in his apartment because I marched him out of this building 14 hours after he stopped sleeping. There is nothing I can do at this console that any of you can't do better. The single most useful thing I can do for this company right now is get in my car and go wake up the man I fired and beg him to come back. So that is what I'm going to do. Nobody argued with her. There was nothing to argue. Her assistant came back in under 2 minutes, and it had taken her most of that time because Andrew's personnel file was thin, the file of a man who'd never made himself visible, never inflated himself, never left much of a trail. She had to dig through emergency contact records to find a current address at all. Here, the assistant said and read it out. An ordinary neighborhood. Older construction. A place Olivia would think later where people actually lived as opposed to performed living. She took the address and she looked at the phone number on the screen one more time, and she called it herself standing right there. Once, twice, 3 times. It rang and rang into nothing. Come on, she murmured at the ringing. Come on, pick up, please. He didn't. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at the senior engineer. Hold it together as long as you can, she said. Slow the bleeding any way you can. Don't do anything drastic. Don't make it worse trying to fix it fast. I'm going to bring back the man who built the thing you just tore down. Keep it alive until I get back with him. And if he won't come, Olivia stopped at that, because it was a real question. She had thrown this man out of his job that very morning in front of his colleagues without letting him say one full sentence. She had humiliated him. She had cost him his livelihood. A man with a life she knew nothing about. A man who she was beginning to understand might have people depending on that livelihood. Why on God's green earth would he come back for her? Then I'll have earned that, she said. But I have to try. Because if I sit up in that office and let this thing burn because I was too proud to go apologize to the man I wronged, then I'm not fit to run this company anyway. She turned and walked to the elevator, and she rode it down to the parking structure, and she got in her own car, and for a moment, she just sat there with her hands on the wheel exactly the way Andrew had sat in his own driveway a few hours earlier, though she didn't know that. She sat there, and she felt the full weight of the morning settle onto her. The certainty she'd felt, the satisfaction, the clean, sharp pleasure of decisive action, and the way all of it had been built on a foundation of nothing. Of an image. Of a story. Of 10 seconds of looking at a sleeping man and deciding she already knew everything there was to know. She had been so proud of not needing to hear anything. She started the car and pulled out onto the road, and she drove across the city toward a neighborhood she'd never had a reason to visit. Toward an apartment she'd never seen, toward a man she'd wronged more completely than she had ever wronged anyone in her life, to ask him for the one thing she had no right to ask. Back in the building, the red screens kept bleeding, and the engineers kept fighting a losing fight, and Daniel sat down at Andrew's empty desk and put his head in his hands. And on the low table beside the cold coffee, the browser stayed open to a file that had told them everything written by a man who'd known he might not be there, who'd known and warned them, and left a number and a plea, and who had asked them in the plainest words he had for one simple thing. Do not restart it. The clock on the wall read 1:26. They had restarted it 39 minutes ago. The drive took 22 minutes, and Olivia Bennett spent every one of them arguing with herself. Part of her. The part that had run the meeting that morning. The part that had built her whole career, kept trying to draft the conversation in advance. Frame it as a business proposition. Offer him his job back with a raise. Make it clean, transactional, professional. People responded to incentives. Offer him enough, and he'd come. That part of her wanted to walk in with a number, but another part of her, quieter and newer, kept overriding it. Because she'd read his file. She'd read the notes of a man who'd fought alone for 2 days and gotten nothing for it but a badge confiscated in front of his colleagues. A man like that didn't come back for a number. A man like that had probably never worked for a number in his life. And if she walked into his home and led with money, she suspected he'd look at her the way you look at a person who has learned nothing at all. "Just tell the truth," she said out loud to the empty car at a red light. "You tell him the truth, and you ask him. That's it. That's all you've got." She almost didn't believe she was saying it. 2 days ago that morning, she'd have found the whole idea absurd. Olivia Bennett did not drive across town to grovel at the door of a subordinate. But she wasn't the woman she'd been that morning. That woman had walked into an operations center certain she understood everything, and that certainty was currently redirecting corporate funds into the dark. She found the building. Older. Ordinary. A place with a life to it. She parked at the curb and sat for a second, and then she made herself get out before she could talk herself into anything smaller than what she'd come to do. She climbed the stairs. She found the door. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder, and she was reaching for her phone to try the number. A fourth useless time when the door opened, and a child was standing in it. Small. 7 maybe. Slightly disordered hair like she'd been lying down. A stuffed rabbit worn soft at the seams tucked under one arm. And she looked up at Olivia with a steady assessing calm that stopped the CEO of Aurelius Pay dead where she stood, because it was a look Olivia had seen exactly nowhere else. The look of a child who has learned to read the adults who come to the door quickly, because reading them matters. "Are you looking for my dad?" the girl said. Olivia opened her mouth, and for a moment nothing came out. She had not known there was a child. It had not appeared in any part of the picture she'd built of Andrew Foster, because the picture she'd built had been made of a rumpled shirt and a cold cup of coffee and a man asleep at his desk. There'd been no daughter in that picture. There'd been no home. There'd been no life at all, because she'd never once imagined that the man had one. He was a symbol. Symbols don't have 7-year-olds who answer the door holding a stuffed rabbit. "Yes," Olivia managed. "Yes, I'm looking for your dad. Is he home?" "He's sleeping." The girl said it carefully, and she lowered her voice a little the way children do when the sleep nearby is the real and serious kind. "He's really, really sleeping. He hasn't slept in a long time. I'm not supposed to wake him up." "I understand," Olivia said. And she did. God help her, she understood exactly why he hadn't slept in a long time. The girl studied her for another second, weighing something, and then apparently deciding this stranger in the nice coat didn't seem dangerous. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can come in, but quiet." "What's your name?" Olivia asked softly, stepping inside. "Chloe." "That's a beautiful name. I'm Olivia." "Do you work with my dad?" The question was simple and direct, and it went into Olivia like a needle, because the honest answer was, "I fired your father this morning, sweetheart," before he could finish a sentence. And she couldn't say that. She wouldn't. So she said, "I do. I work with your dad. Something happened at work, and I really need to talk to him. It's important. That's why I came all the way here." Chloe nodded, accepting this with the grave practicality of a child who understood that her father's work was important because her father was important because her father was the whole world. And then Olivia saw him. He was lying on his side on the sofa, in the same wrinkled shirt from that morning. She recognized it. She'd stood over him and read his name off a badge while he wore it, and he still had his jacket on. His laptop was open on the low table beside him, its lock screen still slowly cycling through remote monitoring displays, the numbers on it climbing red that he couldn't see. One shoe was off. The other was still on his foot. He hadn't even made it all the way out of his own clothes before his body took him down. A glass of water sat on the table, poured and forgotten. On the kitchen counter, she could see takeout containers, several of them, the meals of a man eating without attention across days while he held a company together with his hands. He had the stillness of a man who had not decided to stop. He'd simply run out of anything left to give. Olivia stood in that small, careful, loved apartment and looked at the sleeping man and felt every assumption she'd carried into the operations center that morning come back and land on her at once. The image she'd built in 10 seconds. The certainty. The complete, total, catastrophic wrongness of it. "Daddy hasn't really slept," Chloe said quietly beside her. The girl was looking at her father with an expression that was too old for her face. He said something bad was happening at work. He said he had to fix it. He promised he would rest after he fixed it. The words were so simple, so factual, and they hit Olivia somewhere physical, somewhere below all her defenses, because she was standing here as living proof that he hadn't gotten to rest after he fixed it, that he'd fixed it, and held it, and then been thrown out before he could hand it off, and that the bad thing he'd been fighting was at this very moment tearing loose across the city because of an order that had come out of her own mouth. "Is anyone here with you, Chloe?" Olivia asked. "Are you here alone?" "Mrs. Harmon comes over. She's our neighbor. She was here this morning, and she's coming back soon." Chloe hugged the rabbit a little tighter. "Daddy fell asleep as soon as he got home. He didn't even eat. He just said hi, and then he was asleep." Olivia crouched down slowly so she was at the girl's eye level. Her knees were unsteady, and she didn't know if it was the position or everything else. "Chloe," she said gently, "I know your dad needs to sleep. I can see how tired he is, but the bad thing at work, it's happening right now. And your dad is the only person who knows how to stop it. If I don't wake him up, a lot of people are going to get hurt. Not hurt in their bodies. Hurt like people are going to lose money they need. Regular people. Is it okay if I wake him up just to ask him?" Chloe looked at her father for a long moment, and then she looked back at Olivia with those steady eyes, and she said the thing that Olivia would carry for the rest of her life. "He always wakes up when it's important," the girl said. "He never says no when it's important. That's how he is." A pause. "But you have to promise me he can rest after, for real this time." Olivia's throat closed. "I promise," she said. And she meant it more than she had meant anything in a very long time. "I promise you, Chloe. After this, he rests. I'll make sure of it. That's a promise from me to you." Chloe nodded, satisfied that a deal had been struck, and stepped back to give her permission its space. Olivia turned to the sofa. She reached out and touched Andrew's shoulder gently. "Andrew," she said. "Andrew, I need you to wake up." Nothing. She tried again, a little firmer, her hand on his shoulder. "Andrew, it's Olivia Bennett. I need you to wake up, please." He came back the way profoundly sleep-deprived people come back, not all at once, but in layers, surfacing and sinking and surfacing again. His eyes opened, unfocused, found the ceiling, found nothing. His brow furrowed. His lips moved without sound. And then his eyes found her face, standing over him, and something flickered through them. Confusion, then recognition, then a specific, weary understanding that was almost worse than anger, because he wasn't angry. That was the thing that undid her. When Andrew Foster woke up and saw the woman who'd fired him standing in his living room, his first expression was not fury. It was the plain, bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has just been handed one more demand he did not ask for by a person who had already taken enough. He sat up slowly. He rubbed his face with one hand. He looked at her, and then he looked past her at Chloe standing there with the rabbit, and something in his face gentled toward the girl before hardening back toward neutral as he turned to Olivia. He said nothing. He just waited. And the waiting was its own kind of judgment. Olivia had planned on the drive over to ease into it, to build up to it. But standing in front of him now with those exhausted eyes on her, she understood that easing into it would be an insult. This was a man who dealt in truth. So she gave him truth plainly, with nothing arranged around it to soften the edges. "I didn't listen to you this morning," she said. I fired you before I understood what was happening, before I heard a single complete sentence out of you. And I need to apologize for that. I was wrong. I was completely wrong, and I'm sorry." Andrew looked at her. He didn't speak. He wasn't withholding a response to punish her, she could see that. He simply wasn't in a place where the right words would change anything he was feeling. He'd been proven right about the worst thing, and being right about it had cost him a job and dragged him back off the sofa an hour into the first real sleep he'd had in days. An apology didn't move any of that, so she kept going because the situation would not let her wait for him. "They restarted the system," she said. And there it was. Something moved behind his eyes, not shock. He'd known. He'd written the warning himself in a bigger font at the bottom of the page. But knowing a thing might happen and hearing that it had happened are two different weights, and she watched the second one settle onto him. He closed his eyes for a moment. Not dramatic, just heavy. The particular heaviness of a man who was right about a thing he had prayed to be wrong about. "When?" he said. It was the first word he'd spoken to her. His voice was rough with sleep. "About an hour ago, 12:47. "Who?" "A supervisor. Marcus Webb." There was congestion on a few clusters. He thought it was a memory issue. She stopped herself. She wasn't here to blame Marcus. It doesn't matter who. It happened. And now it's failing. The routing's redirecting outside the network. Transactions are frozen. Reconciliation's gone dark on corporate transfers. And nobody in that building understands your patch logic well enough to stop it. We tried rollbacks. They won't anchor. We tried isolating nodes. Nobody can map the dependencies. We read your notes out loud to the whole floor, and it didn't matter, because understanding what's wrong and knowing how to fix it are two different things, and you're the only person who can do the second one. Andrew was quiet. He reached over to the low table and picked up the laptop. He pulled up the remote monitoring interface, the same one that had been cycling its lock screen beside him this whole time, showing a disaster he'd slept through. The metrics loaded, and Olivia watched him read them. She watched a change come over him that she would remember for a long time. He didn't gasp. He didn't curse. His face didn't fall. Instead, something in him seemed to engage. The exhaustion didn't leave, but underneath it, a machine started turning over, and she realized she was watching a man read a catastrophe, the way a doctor reads a chart, absorbing the horror and converting it in real time into a problem with a shape and a set of possible responses. His eyes moved across the screen, down across down, less than 60 seconds. Then he set the laptop back down on the table. The numbers had confirmed everything her face had already told him. He didn't stand up. Instead, he turned and looked at his daughter. "Chloe," he said, "did you eat?" The question was so ordinary, so completely disconnected from the burning company across town, that Olivia almost didn't understand it. But Chloe understood it perfectly. "I had a sandwich," the girl said. "Mrs. Harmon made it before she left. Turkey. You finish your schoolwork, the arithmetic. All of it, even the ones with the remainders." Even the remainders. A ghost of something crossed his face, pride buried under the tiredness. "Mrs. Harmon coming back. She said after her doctor. She said soon. You call me if she's not here in an hour. You know the number." "I know the number." Andrew looked at his daughter for a long moment, and something passed between them that had no words in it and needed none. It was the whole shape of their life, a man and his girl, who had learned together how to run a household on trust and short sentences, who had learned how to say goodbye when he had to go back to something hard. He wasn't asking her permission, but he was telling her he saw her and that he'd be back, and that she came first, even now, even with the world on fire. Chloe nodded, and then, because she was 7, and because some things are simple, no matter how old you are inside, she said, "Are you going to go fix the bad thing?" "Yeah, baby. I'm going to go fix the bad thing. And then you'll rest." He glanced at Olivia. Just a flick of the eyes. And Olivia held that look and gave a small nod, remembering her promise. "And then I'll rest," Andrew said. "For real. I promise." Only then did he stand up. And when he stood, he turned to Olivia, and for the first time he gave her a full and direct answer. And it was not the answer she had come hoping for, and it was somehow better than the one she'd come hoping for, because it told her exactly who this man was. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "Before we go, I'm not coming back because you apologized. The apology's fine, I heard it. But that's not why." He picked his laptop up off the table and closed it. "And I'm not coming back for the job. I don't know if I even want the job after this morning. That's a conversation for later." "Then why?" Olivia said quietly. "Because if that breach completes, it's not the company that pays for it." His voice was even certain the voice of a man who'd already thought this all the way through days ago. "It's real people, customers, businesses. There are companies that route payroll through our system. You understand that payroll? There's some guy who did honest work for 2 weeks, and he's counting on that money hitting his account on Friday, and if this thing finishes, he's not getting it, and he didn't do anything wrong. He doesn't know Aurelius Pay from a hole in the ground. He just needs his check to clear so he can pay his rent." Andrew shook his head slowly. "That's who pays. Not you, not me, them. So that's why I'm coming back. Not for you, and not for the apology, and not for the job. For them. I need you to know that going in." Olivia stood there and absorbed it, and she understood that she was in the presence of something she had not accounted for at all in her calculations that morning. She'd fired a symbol, but the man in front of her wasn't a symbol of anything. He was just a person who could not stand by and let people get hurt when he knew how to stop it. A person who was willing to walk back into the building where he'd been humiliated that very morning on no sleep, leaving his daughter behind for the sake of strangers who would never know his name. "I understand," she said, and she did. He changed his shirt in the next room. She heard the drawer, the rustle of it, and came back in a clean one, and it struck her that even that small dignity was something she'd denied him that morning when she'd made the wrinkled shirt into evidence against him. He picked up his jacket. He picked up the laptop. He crossed to Chloe and crouched down and said something to her too quiet for Olivia to hear, and Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck for a second, and then let go. He walked to the door. He looked back once. Chloe lifted the stuffed rabbit and waved its worn paw at him. Andrew almost smiled. Then he opened the door and held it, and looked at Olivia and said, "Let's go. Every minute it's completing, that's money that doesn't come back." They rode the elevator down in silence, and they walked to her car in silence, and they pulled out onto the road, and for the first several minutes, neither of them said anything at all. Olivia drove. Andrew sat in the passenger seat with the laptop open on his knees, already back inside the machine, his eyes flicking across the metrics, his lips moving now and then as he ran something silently. She glanced at him at a red light. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and was running on something past fuel, but his hands on the keyboard were steady. "Can you fix it?" she asked. She hated how small her voice sounded. "The truth, not what you think I want to hear. Can it be fixed?" Andrew didn't look up from the screen. "It can be contained. Some of what's already gone is gone. The transfers that completed to those outside endpoints, those aren't coming back, and I won't lie to you about that. But the thing they built is a staged attack, and stages can be interrupted. If I can get to the console before the whole cluster finishes handing itself over, I can cut the connection they built to the core quarantine, what's frozen, and close the door they came in through." He paused. "It's going to be close. It's a lot worse than it was this morning. Every hour it ran without me made it worse. How much worse? This morning I had walls up. Right now there are no walls. I'm not walking into the fight I prepared for. I'm walking into the fight I was trying to prevent." He said it without accusation, which somehow made it land harder than an accusation would have. But it's still winnable. Barely. Olivia drove. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "You're driving me across town. Ask what you want. This morning, she had to steady her voice. "When I called security, you didn't fight it. You didn't yell. You didn't tell the whole room everything you'd done for the last 2 days. You could have. It might have stopped me honestly if you'd stood there and laid it all out. But you didn't. You took your badge off and you left. Why?" Andrew was quiet for a moment. His eyes stayed on the screen. "Because you'd already decided," he said finally. I've been in enough rooms to know the difference between a person who's asking a question and a person who's already got the answer and is just performing the question. You weren't asking me anything this morning. You'd already written the whole thing before you knew my name. Nothing I said in that room was going to move you. It'd just make me look like a man begging for a job he already lost. And I don't beg. He glanced at her briefly. So I said the one thing that had a chance of mattering to the one person who might listen, and I left. I told Daniel not to restart it. That was the only card I had left worth playing. And he tried, Olivia said. Daniel. He tried to stop them. He remembered what you said. He fought for it. They overruled him. Something eased very slightly in Andrew's jaw. Good kid, he said quietly. He's got the instinct. He's just green. Give him 10 years. Olivia thought about the fact that this man, an hour after being fired, could hear that a junior engineer had tried to honor his warning and respond with good kid, give him 10 years. No bitterness. No I told you so aimed at the boy. Just a craftsman's recognition of another craftsman coming up. You should have been listened to, she said. This morning, before any of it. Your manager should have listened to you 2 days ago when you flagged it. I should have listened this morning. At every single point, the system was set up so that the one person who actually knew what was happening had no way to make anyone hear him. She shook her head, and her hands were tight on the wheel. That's not your failure. That's ours. That's the company's. That's mine as of this morning. Andrew looked over at her, then really looked for the first time since he'd woken up. And she felt herself being measured not unkindly but thoroughly the way he seemed to measure everything. That's the first useful thing you've said, he told her. Not the apology. That. Understanding that it's not about who was right this morning. It's about a company where a man can see a knife coming and have no way to make anybody duck. He turned back to the screen. You fix that, and this morning was worth something. You don't, and it happens again to somebody else, and next time nobody drives across town to wake them up. Olivia didn't answer. She didn't have an answer good enough, so she just drove faster. They came up on the building, and she pulled into the parking structure, and Andrew closed the laptop and sat still for 1 second with his hand on the door handle gathering himself. She watched him do it, watched him find something at the very bottom of an empty tank and pull it up. Okay, he said mostly to himself. Okay. Andrew. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. I know I have no right to your help. I know exactly what I did to you this morning. So thank you. Whatever happens in there. Thank you. He held her gaze for a moment. And then he said something that she would think about for a long time afterward, because it wasn't gracious and it wasn't cruel. It was just true, which was the only currency the man seemed to trade in. Don't thank me yet, he said. We haven't fixed anything, and thank Chloe, not me. If she'd have said don't go, I wouldn't have gone. Then he opened the door and stood and squared his shoulders under a weight that Olivia could not see, but could absolutely feel, and walked toward the elevator that would carry him back up into the building that had thrown him out at 7:45 that morning. The doors opened onto the operations floor, and the room changed. It was not a sound, and it was not a movement, and Olivia could not have described it to anyone who wasn't there. But every person on that floor felt it at the same instant. The specific physical relief of a group of people who have been drowning, who have been managing a thing far past their capacity, and who look up and see walking through the door the one person alive who might actually know how to make it stop. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of relief. It was quieter and deeper than that. Daniel was the first to see him. He came up out of Andrew's chair like it had burned him, his face doing something complicated, guilt and hope, and something close to tears all at once. Andrew, he said. Man, I tried. I swear to God I tried. I told him I know, Andrew said, walking past him toward the primary console, not slowing down. Olivia told me. You did right. It's not on you. He reached the console. He didn't sit yet. He stood over it, taking it in his eyes, moving across the wall of red. Somebody give me the seat and full log access. Right now. And I need somebody to tell me out loud fast, No editing every single thing this floor has tried since 1247. The room seemed to exhale and inhale in the same motion, and then it moved. An engineer scrambled out of the chair. Andrew sat down in it. His hands came up over the keyboard and hovered there for just a second, and Olivia, standing at the edge of the working area, saw them tremble once, just once from exhaustion before they steadied. "Log access is up," someone said. 1247 restart executed on cluster 4. Another voice began, rapid and tight. 90 seconds of apparent recovery, then token desync cascaded across authentication. "Keep going," Andrew said, his eyes already flying across the logs. "We tried a rollback to the last checkpoint. Wouldn't anchor. Tried a second checkpoint further back, same thing. Because the state you're rolling back to never got written to disk." Andrew said, not as a rebuke, just narrating what he was seeing. "It lived in memory. The restart ate it. Keep going. What else?" "Tried to isolate the outbound flagged nodes, but they're cross-talking with legitimate traffic, and we couldn't tell which connections were ours. Because some of them aren't yours. Keep going." They gave him all of it fast, and he listened without interrupting again, absorbing every failed attempt, every dead end, every place they'd wasted precious minutes. And Olivia watched his face and saw him building something behind his eyes, some structure taking shape out of the chaos on the screens. The engineer finished. The room went quiet, and Andrew Foster sat there for about 8 seconds, perfectly still, his eyes moving across the red, the whole burning company held in the silence of one exhausted man's concentration. Then he leaned forward. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it in order. And nobody freelances, and nobody touches anything. I don't tell them to touch. Are we clear?" The room said yes, every voice in it. Yes. And Olivia Bennett, standing at the edge watching the man she'd fired at 7:45 that morning, take command of the fight to save her grandfather's company. At 2:04 that afternoon, understood that she was watching the most competent person she had ever seen in her life, and that she had very nearly thrown him into the street for the crime of being too tired after saving them all to keep his head up off his desk. "You," Andrew said, pointing at a cluster of engineers near the left bank of monitors. "5 of you. I want you on the anomalous outbound connections. But listen to me, do not blindly block them. You hear me? Do not just cut them off." "Why not?" one of them said. "They're stealing. Because if you slam the door, they know you found the door, and they'll do something we don't have time for." Andrew said, already typing, his eyes not leaving the screen. "You're going to redirect them. Every anomalous outbound stream you funnel into a controlled observation environment. A sandbox. Let them keep talking. Let them think they're still winning. Meanwhile, we watch exactly what they're reaching for, and we get to close the door on our schedule instead of theirs. Redirect, don't block. Say it back to me." "Redirect, don't block," the engineer repeated. "Go." 5 people turned and moved. "You two." Andrew's finger swung to a pair near the routing consoles. "I need a mirror pathway. I need to know exactly where the redirected transaction data is going. Every endpoint outside our verified network, I want it mapped. I want it live. I want to see it building on a screen in front of me. Don't touch it. Don't interfere with it. Just watch it and show me. I need to know how far this thing has reached before I start cutting." "On it." 3rd group. He turned to the right. 3 of you. Prep a controlled failover for the highest value processing queue. Not the whole system, just the top queue. The biggest transfers, the ones that hurt the most if they complete to the wrong place. If this goes bad in the next 20 minutes, I want to be able to pull that one queue out clean, without the rest of the machine noticing. Have it staged and ready. Do not execute until I say. Understood. His head turned, searching the room. "Where's legal? Anybody from legal on the floor?" "There's a paralegal," someone said. "Down from the 17th. Sarah." Sarah. Andrew found her, a young woman clutching a legal pad against her chest like a shield. "I need you to do something, and I need you to do it carefully." Get the 3 biggest enterprise clients on the phone, the ones with the tightest contracts, the ones whose lawyers eat companies like ours for breakfast. You tell them we've identified a temporary technical issue and we're actively resolving it. Those words. Temporary technical issue. Actively resolving. You do not say breach. You do not say attack. You do not say anything that trips a contractual escalation clause, because the second one of those clauses fires, we're fighting a lawsuit and a hacker at the same time, and I can only do one of those things. Can you do that? Sarah swallowed. Temporary technical issue. Actively resolving. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Go. She went. And then Andrew turned and looked at Daniel, who was standing just behind his shoulder, hovering, desperate to be useful, and Olivia watched the older man's face soften by a single degree. Daniel. Yeah, whatever you need. I need you to do the most important job in this room, Andrew said. And it's the one nobody ever wants. Daniel's face lit with a terrible eagerness. Anything. I need you to sit right here next to me with a clean document open, and I need you to record every single command I issue, in order, time-stamped, exactly as I say it. You don't interpret it, you don't clean it up, you don't fix my typos. You write down exactly what I do in the order. I do it as I do it. He held the young man's eyes. Because if I go down, if I fall asleep in this chair, which is not impossible, I'll be honest with you, somebody has to be able to pick up where I left off. And more than that, after today, this can never be a thing that only lives in one man's head again. This time it gets written down while it happens. You understand what I'm asking you? You're not fetching coffee. You're building the map. You're the reason this is never a one-man wall again. Something changed in Daniel's face, the guilt of the morning transforming right there into purpose. I've got it, he said. Every command, I've got it. Then sit. Daniel sat, and Olivia Bennett stood at the edge of the working area and understood that she was watching something she had never once seen in all her years of investment analysis and corporate strategy, in all the rooms full of accomplished people she had earned her way into. She had seen brilliant people before. She'd seen decisive people. But she had never seen anything like this. A man running on no sleep, an hour after being publicly humiliated, dropped into a burning building who in the space of about 90 seconds had looked at total chaos and turned it into a plan with a shape and an order and a job for every single pair of hands in the room, including the job of making sure the whole thing outlived him this time. He wasn't performing mastery. That was the thing that struck her hardest. He wasn't putting on a show of being in charge. He was simply executing a plan she realized been building in his mind for 2 days. Building it while he held the walls up. Building it against exactly this scenario, and now adapting it live to a version of the disaster that had gotten worse than he'd hoped, because they'd let it get worse. For a while, Olivia said nothing and did nothing because there was nothing for her to do, and she'd learned finally expensively that a person who has nothing useful to add should have the grace to stand still. She watched the mirror pathway build on the big screen node by node, a spreading map of every place the attackers had reached. She watched the observation environment fill up with redirected streams. She watched Andrew's eyes move across all of it, taking it in, saying almost nothing. Then quietly she stepped closer and she said, "Is there anything I can do?" Andrew didn't look up. "You mean it?" "I mean it." "Then keep the room off my back," he said. "In about 10 minutes, somebody from the executive floor is going to come down here wanting a status update, or the CTO's going to show up wanting to be briefed, or a client's going to demand to talk to somebody in charge. Every one of those things is going to want a piece of my attention, and I don't have any spare. So you're in charge. Anybody comes down here needing an answer? They get you, not me. You buy me the room to work. That's the most useful thing the CEO of this company can do right now. Can you do that?" "Yes," Olivia said. And for the first time all day, it felt like the right kind of decisiveness, not the kind that threw a man into the street, but the kind that stood in a doorway and kept the noise off a man who was trying to save them all. "Yes, nobody gets to you unless it comes through me first. Work." Good. A pause. There's one more thing you can do. Name it. Get somebody to bring me a large coffee and the strongest thing the vending machine has. And a glass of water. An actual glass of water. Because I haven't had one in about a day, and my hands are starting to tell me about it. He said it flatly without self-pity, a mechanic listing what the machine needed. I can run this fight, but I can only run it if the body keeps the lights on for another 2 hours. So, coffee, sugar, water. That's a real request, not a small one. Olivia went and got it herself. The CEO of Aurelius Pay walked to the break room, found the coffee, made it strong, grabbed a candy bar and a bottle of water, and on second thought, a second candy bar, and carried them back across the operations floor and set them down at Andrew's elbow without a word. He nodded once, took a long pull of the water first, and went back to work. And for the next stretch of time, she'd lose track of exactly how long Olivia Bennett did the job Andrew had given her, and it turned out to be the hardest and most humbling work she'd done all day. The CTO arrived, finally sharp-suited and full of strategic questions, and Olivia intercepted him at the elevator and briefed him herself and quietly, firmly kept him away from the console. A senior client called furious, demanding to speak to whoever was in charge, and Olivia took the call in a side room and absorbed the man's anger and gave him temporary technical issue, actively resolving in her own steady executive voice, and bought Andrew another 20 minutes. A board liaison came down, asking pointed questions about liability, and Olivia met him at the door and answered everyone and did not let him near the working area. She stood between Andrew Foster and the entire weight of the organization, and she held it off him, and it was the first thing she'd done all day that she was not ashamed of. Back at the console, the fight was turning. Andrew had watched the mirror pathway finish building, had studied the full map of everywhere the attackers had reached. And then he'd gone quiet and still for a long moment, and Daniel, sitting beside him with the command log open, had watched him and finally whispered, "What? What is it?" "Now I can see the whole thing," Andrew said softly. 2 days I've been fighting this blind one node at a time in the dark. Now they've shown me their whole hand. Something that was almost a smile touched the corner of his mouth. They got greedy. When the restart opened the door, they reached for everything at once. And reaching for everything at once is how they showed me every finger. Is that good? That's very good. He cracked his knuckles. Start writing. This is the part that matters. And then he began, and Daniel wrote. And it was the strangest thing Olivia had ever half-watched, from across a room, a man dismantling an attack the way a surgeon works, precise and unhurried, and completely certain, each move setting up the next. He severed the anomalous routing pathway from its connection to the core payment layer, not all at once, but in a careful sequence that kept the attackers from realizing the road had been cut until it was already gone. He isolated the 3 suspended high-value transactions, the frozen ones caught halfway between here and gone, and quarantined them one by one, pulling them out of the machine and locking them in a safe holding state before a single dollar could complete to an endpoint out in the dark. 3 high-value confirmed quarantined, he said aloud, and Daniel wrote it. None of them completed. We caught all 3. Somebody near the back of the room let out a breath that was almost a sob. Not done, Andrew said without looking up. Not close to done. Keep writing. He found the door the attackers had built the path and the foothold at the edge. The low-priority authentication relay he'd first spotted 2 days ago, now blown wide open by the restart, and he began to close it. Not with a single command, but with 17 specific changes to the authentication configuration, each one narrowing the gap, each one taking away one more thing the attackers could reach until the door they'd built was not just shut, but sealed, and the key they'd cut for themselves was worthless. Change 17, he said a long time later, his voice gone hoarse. Applied. He sat back an inch. The pathways severed, the doors closed, the keys dead. They're locked out. For a second, nobody moved because nobody quite believed it. Say that again, Olivia said from the doorway. She'd come back from turning away her third executive of the hour and caught the last of it. "Andrew, say it again. They're out." He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "The intrusion pathway is closed, permanently if we do the follow-up right. The authentication layer's restabilizing. I can see it coming back up. Look, the desync's clearing. They can't reach the core anymore. They can't reach anything anymore. It's over. The active phase is over." And the room broke. Not into cheering exactly. It was too big and too raw for cheering. It broke into something else. A collective ragged exhale. A dozen people releasing 2 hours of held breath at once. Somebody laughing in the disbelieving way people laugh when the thing they were sure would kill them didn't. An engineer put his face in his hands. Another gripped the shoulder of the man beside him. Daniel stared at the document full of commands he'd recorded, at the whole map of how it had been done, now written down and safe, and his eyes were wet. Olivia felt the tension go out of her in a single wave that was so sudden it made her dizzy. She put a hand on the doorframe to steady herself. Andrew didn't celebrate. He just sat there for a moment, looking at the screens, watching the red bleed slowly back toward amber, and then in places toward green. And then he started giving instructions again, quieter now, because the emergency was over, but the work wasn't. "It's contained," he said. "That's not the same as fixed. Listen up, because I'm about to run out and this part has to happen whether I'm awake for it or not." He pointed as he spoke, and Daniel kept writing. "The 3 quarantine transactions get manually reconciled carefully by hand with 2 sets of eyes on each one. Do not rush them. The couple of transaction batches that completed to the outside endpoints before I cut the pathway, those are gone, and we need an honest accounting of exactly how much. No rounding, no hiding it, because the recovery starts with telling the truth about the whole. 2 enterprise clients need formal incident notifications. Real ones, not the holding language we use to keep them calm. The honest version, now that we can control the timing. And there's going to be a security audit, and it's going to be long and expensive, and it needs to be because we need to know how they got the foothold in the first place, so it never happens again." "We'll handle it," the senior engineer said. "Andrew, we've got it. You did the part only you could do. We can do the rest." Andrew nodded slowly, and Olivia, watching him, saw the thing he'd been holding off finally start to arrive, saw the adrenaline that had carried him through the last 2 hours begin to drain out, saw his shoulders come down, saw the exhaustion he'd been out running since he woke up on that sofa finally catch him from behind. She crossed the room to him. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it," he said. This time there were enough hands. That's the difference. This morning there was 1 set of hands and they took them out of the building. He said it without heat, just as a fact, and it landed on Olivia the way the truest things always did, without any need for accusation, because the truth was accusation enough. "But we did it. It's contained." "Then you're done," she said. "You keep your promise now, to Chloe. You go home and you rest, and everything else. The reconciliation, the audit, the clients that gets handled by the people, you just showed how to handle it. That's an order from the CEO." A pause, and then softer. "The first order I've given all day that I'm actually sure about." Something moved across Andrew's tired face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of the room where a smile lived. "Not yet," he said. "One more thing, then I'll go." He stood up, and his legs weren't much steadier than they'd been that morning. But he got up and he turned to face the room, the whole floor, all of them, the ones who'd fought beside him, and the ones who'd watched him get walked out at 7:45 and said nothing. And Olivia braced a little, because he had every right in the world to say something bitter now, to remind them all of what they'd done and failed to do, and no one would have blamed him. He didn't. "I want to say something and then I'm going home to my kid," Andrew said. His voice was rough, but it carried. "This didn't happen because any one of you did something wrong today. Marcus, that restart, I'd have made the same call you did if I didn't know what I knew. You had congestion and a tool that clears congestion. That's not a screw-up. That's a system that never told you the truth about what you were sitting on top of." He looked around the room. This happened because we built a company where the important stuff lives in one guy's head, and there's no clean way for that guy to make anybody hear him when it counts. That almost killed us today. Not the hackers. That. So when I come back, and we'll talk about whether I come back, the price is that we fix that. We fix it so nobody in this room is ever the only wall again. Deal. Deal. Daniel said first and loudest. And then it went around the room like a current. Deal, deal, deal. A dozen exhausted voices. And it wasn't an employment negotiation. It was something closer to a vow. Andrew nodded once, satisfied. And then he looked at Olivia. Now, I'll go home, he said. I'll drive you. You don't have to. I'm driving you home, Andrew, Olivia said. And there was no arguing with it because it wasn't a CEO's order. This time, it was just one person insisting on doing one small right thing for another. I brought you here. I brought you back into a fight you never should have been in. The least I can do is take you back to your daughter. She hesitated. And I promised her, face to face, that you'd rest after. I intend to keep that promise, and I can't keep it from up in my office. Andrew looked at her for a long moment. And then he nodded and picked up his jacket and left the coffee and the second candy bar untouched on the desk and let the CEO of the company that had fired him that morning walk him to the elevator. But before they reached it, the senior engineer's voice stopped them both. Ms. Bennett? Olivia turned. The man had stood up from his console, and the whole room was looking at her now, really looking in a way they hadn't dared to that morning. And she felt the old instinct rise, the instinct to control the room to shape what they thought of her. She pushed it down. Whatever they were about to say, she'd earned it good or bad. There's going to be a review, the engineer said. An emergency one. Tonight, probably. The board's going to want the whole timeline. Everything that happened from when Andrew first flagged it 2 days ago all the way through. He held her eyes. That timeline includes this morning. It includes the termination. It's going to include all of it. You understand what I'm saying? I understand exactly what you're saying, Olivia said. And she did. He was telling her as gently as a man could that the record was going to show that the CEO fired the one man who could save the company on her first morning before he could finish a sentence, and that when the board convened, everyone in the room would be watching to see what she did with that. Whether she'd reach for the careful language, the process gaps, and communication breakdowns, the fog of institutional blame that let everyone off the hook, and no one in particular carry the weight. Whether she'd protect herself. She looked at Andrew standing beside her, swaying slightly with exhaustion, waiting to go home to his daughter. Then she looked back at the engineer. When that review happens, Olivia said, and her voice was clear enough to reach the whole floor, I'll be there. And I won't be hiding behind a single word of it. Everyone in this building saw what I did this morning. They're going to hear me name it plainly in front of the board in my own words. I'm not going to let it get buried under process language so that nobody has to be responsible. Somebody was responsible. She paused. I was. And I'll say so. The room was quiet. Andrew beside her said nothing. But she felt him glance at her, and it was a different kind of look than the exhausted, wary one he'd given her in his living room. Not warm, not forgiveness. But something had shifted in it, the smallest possible recalibration, the look of a man who trades only in truth, beginning to suspect that the person next to him might be learning to trade in the same currency. Come on, she said to him more quietly. Chloe's waiting. Let's get you home. And they walked to the elevator together. The man who'd been thrown out of the building that morning, and the woman who'd thrown him out, and the doors closed on a floor that was slowly screen by screen, turning from red back to green, and on a dozen people who had just watched the whole shape of who was worth listening to get rearranged in front of them in the space of a single afternoon. The drive back to Andrew's apartment was different from the drive out. On the way there, Olivia had rehearsed apologies and argued with herself and gripped the wheel like it might get away from her. Now she just drove, and Andrew sat in the passenger seat with his eyes closed, not asleep, just resting them, and for a while, neither of them felt any need to fill the quiet. It was a different kind of silence than the mornings. The morning silence had been a wall. This one was something closer to a truce. "She's going to be glad to see you," Olivia said eventually. "She'll be glad I kept my promise," Andrew said, eyes still closed. "That's the part she cares about. That when I say I'll rest after, I actually rest after." A pause. "I broke that promise a few times this week. She counts. Kids count everything. They remember every time you said you'd be there and weren't." Olivia thought about that, and about the man's whole careful life organized around not letting a 7-year-old feel the absence of anything essential. "Can I ask about her mother?" she said carefully. "You don't have to." "Cancer. A few years back. Long illness, the kind that gives you time to get ready, and then you find out there's no such thing as ready." He said it evenly, the way people say things they've said to themselves 1,000 times in the dark. "It's been me and Chloe since. We figured out how to run a house on trust and short sentences. She's better at it than I am, honestly." "She's remarkable," Olivia said, and meant it. "The way she read me at the door. She decided whether to let me in. 7 years old. She's had to be." There was no self-pity in it, just fact. "I'd rather she got to be a regular careless kid. But you play the hand you're dealt." He opened his eyes and looked out the window at the neighborhood coming up. "That's the whole reason I do the job the way I do it, you know. Everybody thinks I stay quiet because I'm antisocial. I stay quiet because I've got exactly one thing I'm protecting, and it's not my career. It's that girl. Every hour I spend playing office politics is an hour I'm not spending making sure she never wants for anything. So I don't play. I just do the work and go home." Olivia pulled up to the curb and put the car in park, and she sat with that for a moment before she said what she'd been building up to the whole drive. "That's exactly why what I did this morning was so much worse than I even understood at the time," she said. "I didn't just fire an employee. I looked at a man protecting his daughter, and I decided in 10 seconds that his tiredness was a character flaw. I made the most careful, responsible thing about you into the thing I used against you." She shook her head. "I've been telling myself all day that the worst part was the timing. That I fired you at the worst possible moment for the company. But that's me making it about the company again. The worst part isn't what it almost cost Aurelius Pay. The worst part is what it would have cost her." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "You're getting closer," he said finally, not unkindly. "To what?" "To the actual thing." He unbuckled his seatbelt. "This morning you thought leadership was about seeing clearly and acting fast. And you can see clearly and act fast. I watched you do it this afternoon, keeping that whole circus off my back so I could work. That was good. That was real leadership. The difference between the morning version and the afternoon version isn't that one was decisive and one wasn't. You were decisive both times. The difference is that this afternoon you knew the thing you didn't know. This morning, you didn't even know there was a thing you didn't know." He opened the door. "That's the whole lesson. It only cost you a company you didn't quite lose and a man you almost destroyed. Cheap, all things considered." He got out, and then he leaned back down before he closed the door. "You want to come up? She'll want to thank you for keeping the promise. And I think—" He considered it. "I think you should see the part of this that isn't the office. Just once. You spent all day learning what I do for the company. Come see the thing I do it for." Olivia turned off the engine. Chloe opened the door before they'd even knocked. She'd been watching from the window, and she looked at her father, took in the fact that he was upright and walking and home, and then she looked at Olivia, and something in the girl's serious face relaxed into a plain, uncomplicated relief. "You brought him back," Chloe said to Olivia. It wasn't quite a question. "I brought him back," Olivia said. "And the bad thing's fixed. Your dad fixed it. He was Chloe, he was incredible. You should have seen him. He walked into a room where everyone was scared, and he made it okay. Every single person in that building is safe tonight because of your dad." Chloe absorbed this with the gravity of a child receiving official confirmation of something she'd always known. "He's the best one," she said simply. "At his work. He's the best one there. Yeah, Olivia said quietly. He is. I know that now. Andrew crouched down and Chloe folded into him, and he held her for a long moment, with his eyes closed, and Olivia looked away, because it was a thing that belonged to them, and not to her, and she'd learned finally to recognize when a moment belonged to someone else. "Mrs. Harmon make it back?" Andrew asked, still holding his daughter. "She's in the kitchen. She made soup. She said you have to eat it and then go straight to bed, and she'll stay till morning so you can sleep the whole night." Chloe pulled back and fixed him with a stern look that was so much like something Andrew himself would do that Olivia almost laughed. "The whole night, Daddy," she said, and I said. "The whole night," Andrew agreed. "I promise, and this time I'll keep it. Ms. Bennett made sure I could keep it." Chloe turned to Olivia, and then she did something that undid the CEO of Aurelius Pay more completely than anything else that long day had managed. She crossed the small living room, and she reached up and she wrapped her arms around Olivia's waist in a quick, fierce hug. And then she let go and stepped back like nothing had happened. "Thank you for making sure he rests," Chloe said. "That's the most important thing." Olivia stood there with her throat closed and no words in it at all. This woman who'd walked into a company that morning, certain she understood everything about power and leadership and accountability, undone by a 7-year-old's arms around her waist and the simplest sentence in the world. "You're welcome," she managed finally. "You're welcome, Chloe." She didn't stay long after that. Mrs. Harmon's soup was for the family, and Andrew needed to eat it and sleep, and Olivia had a review to prepare for and a company to keep steady through the night. But before she left, Andrew walked her to the door, and in the small space of the entryway, he said one more thing. "I meant what I said in the car. You're getting closer." He paused. "Don't stop it close." "I won't," Olivia said. "Get some sleep, Andrew, and thank you. I know I keep saying it, but I don't have a bigger word." "Thank Chloe," he said again. "But yeah, you're welcome." And that "you're welcome," small as it was the first thing he'd given her all day that wasn't just truth delivered flat. There was something underneath it. Not warmth, not yet, but the place where warmth might one day live. The emergency review convened at 8 o'clock that night. They gathered in the main conference room, the department heads, the CTO, the board's technical liaison, a couple of directors who'd driven in when they heard. The incident report was laid out in full, and it was a brutal document because a true one always is. Andrew Foster had detected the intrusion 2 days before anyone else. He had reported it through proper channels and been told politely to wait and hope it resolved itself. He had ignored that instruction and fought the attack alone for 48 hours, holding the entire infrastructure together by hand. He had been terminated on the incoming CEO's first morning before he could brief anyone. His explicit written warning had been dismissed after his dismissal. The restart had been performed exactly as he'd predicted, with exactly the consequences he'd predicted, and the company had come within an afternoon of a catastrophe it would not have survived. As the timeline reached its end, Olivia watched the room begin to do the thing that rooms full of powerful people always do when a disaster is laid bare. She watched them reach one by one for the careful language. Process gaps, communication breakdowns, understandable given the circumstances of the transition. She heard someone say the phrase, "no single point of failure in the decision chain," which was a beautiful piece of nothing, a sentence engineered to make sure that if everyone was a little responsible, then no one was really responsible at all. She recognized the language. She'd used it herself in other rooms in other years. She knew exactly what it was for. It was a machine for dissolving accountability, and it worked, and it was working right now, and in about 90 more seconds, it was going to smooth this whole thing over into a regrettable but understandable series of unfortunate events for which no one in particular would answer. And Olivia Bennett understood sitting there that letting that happen would be the exact same failure that had caused the whole crisis in the first place. The failure to look at the true thing and name it. The failure to say the costly sentence out loud. If she sat there and let the fog roll in, she'd be doing in this room the same thing she'd done on that operations floor at 7:45 that morning, refusing to see clearly, because seeing clearly was uncomfortable. She stood up. The room went quiet. The CEO, standing up in the middle of the review, had a weight to it, and everyone felt it. "Before this goes any further," Olivia said, "I want to say something, and I want it in the record exactly as I say. It not summarized, not softened. This morning I fired Andrew Foster before I had heard one complete sentence out of his mouth. He tried to tell me his exact words were that I needed to hear what he had to say about the core payment cluster. The core payment cluster. The precise thing that nearly destroyed us today. He named it, and I told him, and I'm quoting myself, please don't. And I had him removed from the building. Nobody moved. I made that decision," she went on, and her voice was steady, based on an image. A man asleep at a desk. I looked at that image for about 10 seconds, and I filled in the entire story that he was careless. That he was the kind of comfortable negligence I'd been brought in to eliminate, that firing him was exactly the clean, decisive leadership this company needed. I was so certain I understood what I was looking at that I refused to look any closer. And that certainty came within one afternoon of costing this company everything it took my grandfather 40 years to build. She let that sit. Now, I could let this review conclude that there were process gaps and communication breakdowns, and everyone in this room could go home tonight feeling like the system failed in some diffuse way that isn't really anybody's fault. And that would be a lie. The system did fail, but the specific nameable thing that turned a manageable crisis into a near catastrophe was a decision. My decision. Made by me out loud in front of dozens of witnesses. I was wrong. Not process was wrong. I was wrong. And I am not going to let that get dissolved into fog so that I don't have to feel it, because the willingness to feel it is the only thing that's going to keep me from doing it again. The room was silent, in the specific way rooms go silent when someone with everything to lose has just said a true and costly thing plainly and refused every available exit. At the far end of the table, Andrew Foster, who had come to the review because they'd asked him to, and who had said almost nothing the whole time, gave a single small nod. He did not perform forgiveness for the room. He did not accept her words with visible warmth. He received the apology the way a man receives it when he has decided that whatever it does or doesn't fix it, at least cost the person who said it something real to say it. He set something down in that nod. Not the whole weight, but enough to keep going. The board liaison cleared his throat. "That's Ms. Bennett. That's a great deal of personal exposure to put on the record." "Good," Olivia said. "It should be. A company where the person at the top hides from the record is a company where everybody learns to hide from the record. And a company where everybody hides from the record is a company where a man can see an attack coming 2 days out and have no way to make anyone listen. That's the disease. What happened today was just the symptom." She sat back down. "So put it in the record, all of it, starting with me." In the weeks that followed, the board moved on Andrew's professional standing, and they moved fast because there is nothing like almost losing everything to focus an organization's priorities. There were offers, an immediate promotion, a significant compensation adjustment, a newly created role overseeing infrastructure security at an organizational level, the kind of authority his expertise had always warranted and never received. But when they sat him down to discuss it, Andrew Foster did a thing that quieted the whole room, because before he would talk about a single title or a single dollar, he laid 3 things on the table, and they were not for himself. "Before anything else," he said, "I want 3 changes. In writing, structural, not promises policy." "Name them," the board chair said. 1. A revised escalation protocol. Any frontline engineer who identifies a genuine security risk gets a direct, guaranteed path to executive leadership. Not through his manager, not through 3 layers of people protecting their own comfort. A direct path that cannot be blocked. 2 days ago, I flagged this thing to my manager and got told to sit on it because the timing was bad, and that alone almost sank us. That can never happen again. If a person in this company sees a knife coming, they get to warn the people who can duck. Structurally, guaranteed. The chair was writing. 2. Shift rotation standards in the operations center. Hard ones. It needs to be structurally impossible for any single person to become the only thing holding a critical system together through sheer exhaustion. I did 48 hours without sleep because there was no one else and no rule that would have stopped me. That's not heroism. That's a design flaw. The next person who tries to be the wall shouldn't be allowed to burn themselves down doing it. Rotate the load. Write it into the standard so it can't be waived when things get busy. And 3. Andrew paused, and this was the one he seemed to care about most. 3. A formal policy protecting any engineer who raises a genuine risk alarm from any professional penalty for raising it. If a person comes forward in good faith about a real risk, they are protected. Full stop. Even if they're wrong. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if it lands on the worst possible day. Because the reason nobody backed me up on that floor this morning, the reason a dozen people watched me get walked out and said nothing, is that speaking up against power in this company has always been a good way to end your career. Fix that, and you don't need me. You'll have 100 people willing to be the wall because they won't be scared to open their mouths. When he finished, the room was very still. Everyone in it understood what they were looking at. A man who had been handed a significant amount of institutional leverage. Real leverage, the kind a person could turn into a fortune and a corner office, and who had chosen to spend almost all of it before he spent a dime of it on himself, on policies designed to protect the next person in his position, to make sure that no one who came after him would ever be destroyed the way he had very nearly been destroyed. Olivia, sitting in on the meeting, looked at the 3 requests written on the chairman's pad, and she thought she had never seen a clearer picture of what the man actually was. He wasn't quiet because he had nothing to say. He was quiet because everything he had, he was saving for the things that mattered: his daughter, and now apparently every stranger who would ever sit at a console in this building and see something wrong and be afraid to say it. I accept all 3, she said before the board could deliberate. Without modification, write them exactly as he said them. And they did. But the change that mattered most was never written into any policy because it couldn't be. It was in Olivia herself, and it showed up not in a document, but in the way she moved through the company in the months that followed. Her decisiveness didn't leave her. She was still sharp, still fast, still capable of walking into a room and cutting to the center of a problem in seconds. But something underneath it had shifted. She slowed down now in the specific moments that called for listening. She started arriving in departments not to inspect them, but to ask questions, and she learned slowly, and with a lot of stumbling, how to ask the kind of questions that made people feel safe enough to tell her the truth, instead of the version of the truth that kept them out of trouble. Most of all, she developed an eye she hadn't had before. She began to be able to tell with increasing reliability the difference between a person who talked loudly and impressively about their work and a person who was quietly, invisibly holding something essential together. She'd walk a floor and find the rumpled, tired, overlooked person at the corner desk, and instead of seeing negligence, she'd learn to ask herself, what does this person know that I don't? What are they carrying that nobody's written down? It was not a skill she'd possessed before. It was one she had paid for at a price she would never forget. But she had it now, and she used it, and Aurelius Pay became slowly over a long time a genuinely different place to work. Because the person at the top had learned the hard way that the most important people in an organization are very often the quietest ones in the room. Andrew took the role, head of infrastructure security. He negotiated the hours carefully. He was home for dinner most nights now, home to hear about Chloe's day, home to help with the arithmetic problems, even the ones with the remainders. He built a team and he wrote things down. And he made sure that the terrible knowledge he'd carried alone in his head for a decade lived in documentation and in other people's minds, so that the company would never again be one tired man away from ruin. Daniel became his first hire. The kid had good instincts. He just needed 10 years, and now he was going to get them with the right person teaching him. One afternoon, several weeks after the whole thing had been formally closed, Olivia came through the main lobby on her way out and saw Andrew near the entrance. He was crouched down, adjusting the strap on a small backpack, listening with complete attention, while Chloe delivered a fast, emphatic, deeply important account of something that had happened at school that day. And Olivia stopped, because his face was doing something she'd never seen it do. She'd seen that face under the worst pressure imaginable, controlled and precise and unbreakable. This was different. This was open. Soft. Lit from the inside in a way that competence never produces and only love ever does. He wasn't a senior executive in a corporate lobby. He was a father at the end of a long day listening to his kid, and that was the only thing in the world he needed to be. Olivia hung back. She'd learned to recognize the moments that belonged to other people. But after a minute she walked over, not as the chief executive, not with any agenda, just as a person. And she reached into her coat pocket and took out the thing she'd been carrying there for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It was a stuffed rabbit. The worn one. She'd noticed it on the apartment floor during her visit that first day, and she'd found it in her coat pocket 2 days later, apparently slipped there by Chloe during the confusion of Andrew being woken up and hauled off to save the company. She'd meant to return it sooner. She'd kept meaning to. Somehow, the right moment had never quite arrived. Or maybe she'd been holding on to it because it was the one soft thing she had from the worst and most important day of her professional life. "I think this belongs to you," Olivia said, and held it out. Chloe's face broke into immediate, uncomplicated delight. "Mr. Wiggles." She snatched the rabbit and tucked it fiercely under her arm, restored complete, a lost thing found. "I thought he was gone forever." "He was in my coat this whole time," Olivia said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to bring him back. He's had quite an adventure." "He rode in your car?" "He rode in my car. Twice, actually." Chloe considered this the height of glamour and hugged the rabbit tighter. Andrew straightened up and looked at Olivia over his daughter's head, and there was no unresolved tension left in the look and no performed warmth in it either. It was something rarer than both. It was the look of two people who had come through something very difficult, from opposite sides of it, who had started that day as an executive and the man she'd wrongly destroyed, and had somehow by the end of it arrived at a place neither of them had planned for or expected. A place built entirely out of hard truth, out of the one currency the man had ever traded in and out of the willingness, his finally and hers, hard-won, to keep trading in it. "Thank you," Andrew said. And it was just those two words. But there was the whole thing underneath them now. The warmth that had only been a possibility weeks ago in his entryway arrived at last. "You're welcome," Olivia said. There was no declaration in it. No clean, tidy ending with a bow on top. Just two adults standing in the ordinary late-afternoon brightness of a corporate lobby close enough to finally see each other clearly, with a 7-year-old between them, hugging a rabbit named Mr. Wiggles, and the quiet, real, unhurried possibility, if both of them were willing to keep choosing it, of something more honest than either of them had ever managed to build before. Chloe tugged her father's hand. "Can we get the ice cream now, you said?" "I said." Andrew agreed. "I keep my promises." He glanced at Olivia, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Ask her. She'll vouch for me on that one now." "He keeps his promises," Olivia said to Chloe solemnly. "I've seen it. He's the best one there." And Chloe nodded because of course he was, because she'd always known it, and she took her father's hand and pulled him toward the door, and the ice cream and the ordinary evening waiting on the other side of it. That is where the story ends, not with a merger or a headline or a fortune, but with a man who was publicly diminished and then publicly restored in the same building in front of many of the same people who had watched him fall. With a woman who walked into power certain of her own clarity, and walked out of that first day having learned the single most expensive lesson of her professional life, that authority exercised without the willingness to listen is not strength at all. It is a specific and very costly kind of blindness. Andrew Foster had been right about the machine, right about the attack, right about the trigger, right about all of it, and being right had nearly cost him everything because the company had built no way for a quiet man to be heard. They fixed that. And the woman who had thrown him out, learned to see the invisible people holding everything together and never unlearned it not once for the rest of her career. Some people announce themselves. Andrew Foster never did. He just showed up and did the work and went home to his daughter. And in the end, that quiet, unannounced, easily overlooked man turned out to be the strongest person in the entire building. Not because he was the loudest. Because when everything came apart, he was the one still standing, still working, still refusing to let people he'd never meet pay for a mistake that wasn't theirs. The tired man in the wrinkled shirt saved them all, and this time everybody knew it.